The concept of Romeo and Juliet or the star-crossed lovers is used in a lot of storytelling, let's just face it. But there's no denying that it has a sort of ability to really shake the foundations that split societies almost have. Two warring factions that are at each other's throats, and these two in the middle that almost bridge the gap. But is Vampire in the Garden, a new series that is airing on Netflix that ran for 5 episodes, really relying on that too much? Well, that's what I'm going to get into with my review of the series, so let's jump right into it. Vampire in the Garden opens up in a world of humans, and at some point, seemingly out of nowhere, vampires started appearing. And being that there was plenty of humans in this world, the vampires began to spread very quickly, with plenty of blood for them to survive off of, and additionally, the fact that they are so powerful compared to the humans, there really was nothing that the humans could do. They were just about to be wiped out until the point in which most of the humans barricaded themselves into a wall of light. This sanctuary was the only place for them to keep the vampires at bay. And as we open up, we follow Momo, who is a citizen within this village. Well, Momo, like many of the citizens within this village, are pretty much like a number. Everybody's assigned a task, and that's what they take care of. And being that she is trained as a soldier, she'll go out on missions every now and then to clear the vampires from the surrounding areas. Well, one day as she's scouting along with the group, she ends up running into a child vampire. Obviously being very conflicted by the fact of killing a child, this child holds up a music box, which is very foreign to her, as the society that mankind has created is against anything of music or old culture because they don't want to draw in the vampires whose senses are very sensitive. And after others arrive and this vampire child feels threatened, she injects herself with this serum that makes her go enraged. They claim this is a drug that will pretty much awaken a vampire's true form, which is very difficult to handle. And what follows this is that Momo's conflicted. She doesn't like the war that kind of surrounds her, and the only solace that she can find is in this music box that she's not even allowed to have. Cut to the other side of the battlefield. We follow a vampire named Fine, and Fine is a princess of these vampires, but it seems like very quickly we establish that she doesn't like the positions that she's in. She doesn't like the war. There's obviously little signs that she has a sort of connection to humans in some way. Somebody from her past that influenced her into music. She's sworn away the life of drinking blood and getting involved with the wars that are involved between the humans and the vampires. And during a conflict, the two of these somehow find themselves meeting. Yes, I know, shocking, I know. Stick with me here. And what follows this is that even though the two of them are sort of conflicted by their races being together, there's one thing that ties them together. It's this fondness for music and this desire for some sort of paradise where the two of them can live together. This sort of myth, this fantasy that there's some place somewhere in the far stretches of the world where both vampires and humans can live together in harmony. So my thoughts on Vampire in the Garden. I actually really enjoyed this show. This is a Wit Studio original series, so it looks very fantastic. It's got its own unique art style, which honestly I'm not too fond of. It's got a very rounded look to the characters and the eyes and the faces and everything, which I don't really particularly care for. But when it comes to the visual presentation, the animation, a lot of the choreography, the music, everything that kind of transpires around it, then I think it all comes together very beautifully. Minus those CGI vehicles. I can do without the CGI cars just flying all over the place, so physics breaking. But that aside, the vehicles aside, everything else looks really fantastic, and I really do have appreciation for a lot of the animation that went through this. You have a lot of fights between vampires and humans, and seeing a lot of the choreography, how things kind of lay out, a lot of those perspective shots and how the action plays out was really fantastic. It really does feel like a movie in a 5-episode format, which is probably what they originally intended for it to be, because it really does feel like the pacing lays it out that way. It almost feels like a very easy flowing from episode to episode that almost makes it feel like a movie split into a TV series. And I almost feel like in a storytelling perspective, yes, because it's only 5 episodes, really does feel like it lays out like a movie. You have the setup, you have the subtle moments, you have the build up to the climax, the big reveal at the end, and then the climactic end. It all flows very simply, and while you might argue is very short and feels like it could have been so much more, I think the pacing really does help it. This show had really solid pacing. I felt like through the entire thing, it was flowing very naturally. Things sped up when it needed to speed up, and there was a through line throughout the entire storytelling process. Nothing felt like it was overdone. Nothing felt like it was underdone. Everything just kind of naturally happened. And I do appreciate for that. I naturally do love OVAs and ONAs, specifically for the fact that it almost feels as if they're able to do the exact time they need to tell their story. They don't have to be forced into the category of having 12 or 24 episodes. They can do whatever they need to get the story done. And that feels like the case here because it feels very natural and doesn't feel overdone. Now, getting back to my whole opening joke, yes, this is sort of pseudo a Romeo and Juliet story. The idea that you have the vampires, you have the humans. One person within those two sides doesn't like the conflict, and somehow they naturally find themselves meeting each other just by chance. And they escape together to try to find their great paradise where the two of them can be together. Now, while this isn't getting into full nature of Yuri here, it's got the tones in there. There is a natural love that's happening between these two characters, but it's not like super romantic here. It's a very special bond between the two of these that they find a common ground. This desire just to have fun, be together, and not be constrained by the wars that's happening around them. From Fine's side, she doesn't like the conflict. She doesn't like the war happening. She feels that if the battles go on, you're just going to destroy the entire beautiful world that we're in. What's the point in gaining the entire world from the humans when it's just going to be scattered in blood? And yes, from Momo's side, after this whole experience of seeing this child, realizing what are we even here for? This small experience with this girl and realizing that she just wanted this music. And yes, being forced, being pushed by her own mother, who is a commander of this area, to do what she needs to do in order to fight against the vampires. Again, this constant desire to just constantly be at war. But I think once the two of these come together, I believe that concept of Romeo and Juliet kind of takes a back seat. Yes, it's always present because they're always being chased by everybody else that doesn't believe they should be together. And if anybody sees them together, it's just unnatural. It doesn't seem right. Every time it feels like they reach some sort of point where they feel comfortable, they feel they're safe, or they feel they found that place where they can actually exist, everything sort of gets turned on its head. Either by just the pure aspects of what makes a vampire, what makes a human, or just the world itself almost kind of bearing down upon them with reality. It's obviously a messed up world that nobody really wins in the end. But I think that's where these two characters really do shine. Make no mistake, Momo and Fine are really fantastic characters. At face value, when you first meet them, they feel like tropes. Fine feels like the girl that doesn't want war and will never drink blood ever again. I'm such a good person, but I'm very, very charming. And Momo's just a normal kid, like just doesn't really have any sort of ambitions, just wants to kind of be comfortable and doesn't really want to get involved with anything. She's the commander's daughter. But it's as the story goes along, I realize at some point, probably in the third or fourth episode, that the characters really did change a lot from the very beginning. Momo becomes a lot more confident, where she was just very passive at the beginning. Fine becomes more conflicted, where she was much more confident at the beginning. It's not a bad thing, it's that moment where you realize she's vulnerable in some cases. Like, she does have these little spots where she's weak at. And I think having that dynamics and characters in just 5 episodes is, yes, I give it a lot of credit for that. It is also kind of shocking that a lot of the side characters, despite the fact that we don't really get much time to spend with them, really do give us a sense of what was and what is now. There's a great sense of contrast that is kind of built throughout the entire series through the eyes of characters such as Momo's uncle and obviously Momo's mom. Additionally, somebody that's connected with Fine. Again, they don't necessarily get deep into them, have any sort of great character developments besides maybe one of them, but you really do get a sense of kind of people realizing that despite the fact that I failed here, it doesn't mean necessarily that everything's set in stone. It's a great little message that I think gets thrown right at the very end that really does come out of nowhere, but I think is really fitting. But I think where the writing does shine the most is when it comes to not sugarcoating concepts. What falls all too easily in a lot of these stories is that idea that it's as simple as just being in love. It's as simple as just being together. The bonds of friendships will overcome everything. But it's not necessarily the case within this world. The writer doesn't make it simple. The idea that a vampire can live with other people, this delusion that Fine has, almost is her downfall. There's natural elements about herself that she can't control. And the writer, again, isn't willing to let that get sugarcoated by friendships. I harken it back to something like Beastars, this idea that no matter what you feel about the society they've built, instincts are still a thing. There's still something about you that you cannot change. But it's your willingness to sort of fix and resolve the issue afterwards that I think sets Fine aside from another vampire. Similarly, on Momo's side, she's not so easily won over. While Fine has had experiences with the idea of existing with the human, Momo hasn't. And Momo has her fears, her distrust, and ultimately, in the end, has to find her own struggle with deciding, is this even right? Will I ever find that paradise? In the end, that's the story. The cultural divide between the vampires and the humans, not sugarcoating their existence together. In the end, I think that's the overall concept that's presented with Vampire in the Garden. Two sides driven by conflict, an inability to coexist, and yet they're trying to find something that can bring them together, and yet in the end almost feeling as if that can never happen. And again, I give the writer a lot of respect for being willing to not sugarcoat that. While most people will never find a common ground, somebody may. There may be a hope in the end that somebody can find a common ground. And while some might find that very cheesy, I found it very endearing. I found it to be a really great experience, and like I said, being presented as well as it was with Wit Studio, doing some fantastic work with both the music, animation, and everything. In the end, it was a fantastic series, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Like I said, only 5 episodes that I felt was just perfectly paced. But that's my thoughts on Vampire in the Garden. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to hit that like button down below. Comment. Let me know what you thought of the series, or if you're going to be checking it out. If you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button. I do reviews, impressions, news bits, top list. If it's anime, it's pretty much here. Additionally, if you want to support us more, we have a link to our Patreon and our tips link in the description below. We definitely appreciate everybody that supports us, and y'all take care.